The chamber rose like a colossal monument carved from centuries of interstellar arrogance, its vaulted tiers filled with delegates who believed their authority was as immovable as the stars. They spoke of humanity as if discussing an unruly frontier species, a civilization that had expanded too quickly, learned too fast, and refused to accept the expected limits. Their voices merged into a cold consensus. Humans needed restraint before their growth disrupted the long-standing order. The debate was not about fairness but fear disguised as policy, and the final vote passed without hesitation. A tribute demand would be sent to Sol, framed as a routine compliance notice, though every species present knew it was nothing less than attempted subjugation. The envoy chosen to deliver the message carried the smug composure of a diplomat convinced of inevitable obedience. He transmitted the decree across the relay networks with ceremonial gravity. Humanity was to surrender a percentage of its starship output, raw materials, and military personnel each standard cycle. In return, the Council would guarantee stability, a thinly veiled threat suggesting consequences for refusal. The envoy's closing words dripped with institutional superiority, implying humans should be grateful for the opportunity to serve a higher order. Then the galaxy waited, confident that the Terran response would be swift compliance or panicked negotiation. Across Earth and the colonies, the transmission struck with the force of an unexpected blow. On Luna's industrial platforms, workers paused mid-operation, staring at the message replaying on public screens. In the orbital farms above Titan, farmers muttered in disbelief while adjusting nutrient calibrators. Mars received the decree with a sudden silence that spread from the domed cities to the subterranean rail hubs. Human citizens tried to interpret the situation in real time. Was the Council truly demanding tribute, or was it a mistranslation, a diplomatic misfire, a miscalculated attempt to reassert dominance in a rapidly shifting political landscape? As the shock settled, anger rose from every corner of human-controlled space. People recognized the decree for what it was, an insult delivered with the assumption that humanity would bow like conquered subjects. The colonies that had endured harsh environments without assistance refused to consider the idea of handing over their hard-earned security. Earth's public channels filled with furious commentary, not reckless rage but a collective certainty that submission was not an option. Humanity had survived wars, scarcity, internal divides, and the vast unpredictability of deep space colonization. They had carved their place through grit, innovation, and unity forged under pressure. They had no intention of relinquishing agency to a council that had never lifted a finger to help them rise. In corporate sectors and research districts, analysts interpreted the decree as a strategic test. The council wanted to measure whether humans could be pressured into compliance before their influence surpassed controllable limits. Military strategists saw something deeper. The council feared a species that evolved faster than expected, overcame obstacles with unconventional solutions, and refused to operate within predictable patterns. Humanity's unpredictability made them dangerous to a system built on rigid rules and hierarchical power. Terran government leaders held emergency communications across interplanetary links. The discussions were calm, focused, and free of panic. They reviewed humanity's current capabilities, the potential motives behind the decree, and the implications of accepting or rejecting it. The analysis made one truth unmistakable. This was not a request but an ultimatum designed to force humans into a lower tier of the galactic hierarchy. Accepting would permanently redefine humanity's role. Rejecting would invite confrontation. Yet every representative understood that choosing subservience would erase everything humanity had built. Terran Fleet Command issued an internal memorandum summarizing the situation. The Council had crossed a line based on flawed assumptions about human compliance. The memo emphasized that any response must be deliberate, unified, and decisive. Human commanders did not advocate reckless retaliation, nor did they consider negotiation with coercive demands a viable path. Their strategy required clarity, strength, and a message that could not be reinterpreted as uncertainty. Across the galaxy, species allied with the Council continued their work without concern, convinced the matter was settled before negotiations even began. They underestimated the weight of what they had triggered. Humanity was not easily cornered, and once provoked, They responded with precision rather than panic. Behind every colony light and every orbital station, the resolve grew stronger. The Council's demand had united a species known for internal debates and conflicting ideologies. Now they stood aligned in purpose. No foreign power would dictate their future. As transmissions flickered across the network, humanity prepared to deliver its answer. The Council expected bargaining. Instead, they were about to learn how humans treated attempts at domination. Terran leadership approached the Council's decree with a level of discipline that contrasted sharply with the arrogance behind the demand. Within secured communication networks, analysts compiled every scrap of intelligence on the Council's strategic posture, fleet composition, political fractures, and economic vulnerabilities. Nothing was taken at face value. Humanity understood that power in the galaxy was rarely about technology alone. Control relied on perception, narrative, and the ability to project dominance without having to prove it. The Council had grown accustomed to compliance because most species feared the consequences of defiance. Humans had no such instinctive submission stored in their cultural memory. The first step was evaluation. Terran fleet intelligence outlined the Council's military strengths: large dreadnought formations, heavily armored cruisers, long-range artillery ships, and standardized support vessels capable of rapid deployment. On paper, the force appeared overwhelming. Yet humans had studied their doctrine closely. The Council relied on rigid command structures that slowed reaction times, predictable formations optimized for intimidation rather than adaptability, and political oversight that interfered with battlefield efficiency. Their power was real but brittle, held together by an illusion of invincibility rather than genuine superiority. Humanity's own capabilities painted a different picture. The fleet lacked the sheer mass of Council armadas, yet Terran engineers had pushed past conventional limitations, creating systems other species dismissed as impossibly unstable or theoretically flawed. Quantum compressor reactors allowed rapid burst acceleration. Adaptive hull plating shifted its molecular configuration to reduce impact damage. Pulse-veiled distortion screens bent sensor signatures into misleading echoes. These technologies were not widespread. Only select vessels carried them, but their existence altered the strategic equation. The Council's knowledge of human tech remained incomplete, and that uncertainty gave Terrans a decisive advantage. Strategists broke down probable Council responses to refusal. The most likely scenario involved a show of force aimed at humiliation rather than destruction: blockades, limited strikes, or seizures of remote stations. The Council rarely committed to full engagement unless confident the target could not withstand the initial blow. Their political structure prioritized maintaining prestige while avoiding long, expensive conflicts. Humanity recognized that the decree was less a prelude to war and more an attempt to crush independence before humans could challenge the established hierarchy. The internal debate among Terran leadership reflected the weight of the moment. Some argued for covert preparation, keeping advancements hidden until absolutely necessary. Others pushed for a direct warning, making it clear that the Council's assumptions were outdated. A smaller faction suggested temporary negotiation, not to concede territory or tribute, but to buy time to reposition fleets silently. Every option was examined, stress-tested, and stripped of emotional bias. Throughout the discussion, a single principle remained unshaken: humanity would not be intimidated into servitude. Civilian representatives emphasized the psychological dimension. Humans had spent centuries navigating adversity without expecting rescue. That resilience formed the backbone of their identity. Accepting the Council's decree would fracture that identity and erode the unity forged across colonies. The people would never agree to tribute, not because of pride, but because they had built their civilization through sacrifice far too costly to surrender at another species' demand. Eventually, the strategic consensus emerged. Terran forces would not posture aggressively but would establish readiness along critical hyperlanes that linked Council territories to human space. No threats, no provocations, just silent positioning that signaled preparedness without escalation. Intelligence teams were instructed to continue monitoring political divisions within the Council, expecting that refusal would cause internal disputes among species reluctant to face a conflict with unpredictable outcomes. Diplomats refined messaging to ensure that when humanity delivered its response, there would be no misinterpretation, no loopholes, and no perceived hesitation. The decision formalized with a clarity that resonated through every command center. The Council believed they were dealing with another frightened newcomer desperate for acceptance. Instead, they faced a civilization that understood both its strengths and its vulnerabilities and was willing to defend its sovereignty with absolute resolve. With preparations in place, humanity drafted its answer. It would not be long, elaborate, or diplomatic. It would carry the weight of a species that refused to trade freedom for safety. The Council expected negotiation or panic. Humanity intended to give them neither. The Galaxy Council assembled in full quorum, convinced the Terran response would follow the familiar cycle: anxious negotiation, half-hearted resistance, and eventual compliance. Delegates adjusted translation implants and cleared data slates while the central display activated. The envoy who had delivered the demand stood at the forefront, prepared to issue a triumphant address once humanity accepted the decree. Confidence radiated through every tier of the chamber, built on centuries of unchallenged domination. The Terran transmission initiated without preamble. No symbol, no anthem, no diplomatic overture. A single line of text materialized across the panoramic interface. Just one word. The translation systems verified it 3 times before projecting it across the chamber in dozens of languages. The simplicity hit harder than any elaborate declaration. Humanity's answer was direct, unembellished, and absolute: no. Silence rippled outward like a shockwave. Delegates who had spent careers commanding fear found themselves unable to speak. The envoy's expression collapsed into disbelief as he scanned the display, expecting some hidden clause or secondary message. There was nothing. Humanity had rejected the decree without hesitation, without apology, and without offering justification. The word hung in the air like a verdict, cutting through centuries of ritualistic diplomacy. The first reaction came from a species known for its temperamental military doctrine. Their ambassador slammed a limb against the railing, demanding punitive action for such disrespect. Others muttered warnings about allowing defiance to spread. Several threatened embargoes or asset seizures. Yet beneath the outrage lay another emotion the Council rarely encountered: uncertainty. No species had ever dismissed the Council decree with such sharp finality. Most negotiated. Some delayed. None offered refusal stripped to its essence. The Central Governance Authority attempted to reclaim control by broadcasting a stern follow-up message. They outlined sanctions, fleet mobilization, and administrative penalties, expecting humans to reconsider once the stakes were spelled out. The Council projected superiority, but the quiver in their collective posture betrayed doubt. Their threats relied on the assumption that the target feared them. Humanity had just demonstrated the opposite. 2 minutes later, the Terrans responded again, this time with a brief voice transmission. The speaker's tone was calm, controlled, and resolutely unafraid. Humans would not negotiate terms imposed under duress. They would not pay tribute. They would not accept subservience. Their refusal was not a declaration of hostility but an assertion of sovereignty. The message closed with a quiet warning: humanity was prepared for any consequences the Council chose to pursue. The chamber erupted into disarray. Some delegates whispered anxiously, realizing humans had likely prepared for this outcome long before the decree was sent. Others suddenly remembered the rumors surrounding recent Terran engineering breakthroughs, rumors the Council had dismissed as exaggerations. Calculations shifted rapidly as species questioned whether a confrontation might expose weaknesses the Council had worked centuries to conceal. Reports flowed in from border regions. Terran vessels had repositioned along several hyperlanes, not in aggressive stances but in formations clearly designed to counter fast strike deployments. Their ships maintained silent running protocols, transmitting no threats, yet their presence carried undeniable intent. The Council realized humanity was neither bluffing nor acting impulsively. Everything had been planned. A few ambassadors argued for immediate retaliation to preserve the Council's authority. However, Others cautioned that if humanity had truly developed the rumored suppression systems capable of neutralizing entire flotillas, a rushed offensive might result in humiliating losses. The Council had survived for so long not by courage, but by avoiding battles they could not win. Humanity's answer forced them to confront the possibility that they were no longer the dominant force in the galaxy. As debate spiraled, the Terrans sent a final short statement. They would not escalate unless the Council attempted coercion. They were ready for dialogue between equals, but they would not entertain demands rooted in superiority. The message carried no arrogance, only precision. It wasn't defiance born of emotion. It was a boundary drawn with the resolve of a species that had survived every challenge without external help. In that moment, the Council understood humanity's refusal was more dangerous than any weapon. It dismantled the illusion that the Council's authority was universal. The one-word answer echoed through the chamber long after the transmission ended, leaving every species to confront a truth they had never anticipated. Humanity was not afraid, and the old balance of power had just shifted. The Council's internal fracture widened the moment humanity's refusal circulated across its networks. Delegates who had once spoken with unified authority now argued behind sealed chambers, each faction calculating risk while pretending confidence. A bloc of hardliners insisted that allowing humans to reject the decree would unravel centuries of compliance from lesser species. Their solution was blunt: launch a controlled strike to demonstrate dominance. They claimed humanity's technological progress was overstated and that a swift, decisive action would force them back into line. Others warned that provoking a species capable of such absolute defiance without hesitation was reckless, but political pressure drowned out caution. Within days, a Council strike fleet assembled near a neutral corridor leading toward a mid-tier Terran colony. Their objective was not annihilation, simply overwhelming intimidation. The Council assumed the colony would panic at the sight of superior numbers. They predicted humans would either surrender or call for negotiations, giving the Council a narrative victory. Their formation moved with rehearsed precision, weapons primed but not locked, engines broadcasting a force signature designed to unsettle anyone watching. They opened a channel and issued a demand. The colony was to stand down, power down defenses, and accept temporary occupation while humanity reconsidered its position. The colony transmitted no reply. The silence grated against the Council commander's expectations. He prepared a warning volley, but before the order left his lips, every vessel in the fleet registered a sudden distortion across their sensor arrays. The phenomenon grew from a faint ripple to a dense interference pattern that severed long-range telemetry. Crews scrambled to restore systems, assuming a malfunction. Then the lighting dimmed as power grids flickered. Engines sputtered through cascading shutdown protocols. Weapon capacitors drained to zero without external breach. In under 20 seconds, the entire strike group went dark. A Terran signature materialized at the edge of the disrupted corridor, one ship, positioned deliberately where it would be seen even by vessels running on auxiliary reserves. No weapons displayed, no shields flared, no aggressive maneuvers executed. The difference between the motionless Council fleet and the steady Terran vessel made the disparity unmistakable. Humanity had neutralized an entire armada without firing a shot. Their technology bypassed every defensive measure the Council considered foolproof. The strike commander shouted demands for identification, but his voice reverberated inside his powerless ship with no outbound transmission achieving coherence. A message arrived through an emergency band pulse narrow enough to slip past the dying systems. It carried a single Terran statement: their actions had been restrained by design. No one had been harmed. The shutdown could have been destructive, yet humanity chose disruption over devastation. The message's tone held no triumph, only a warning layered beneath calm precision. This was the smallest demonstration humanity was willing to give. Any further attempt at coercion would be met with consequences tailored not to punish but to permanently end the Council's ability to threaten them. The Council scrambled to interpret the incident. Delegates panicked as reports confirmed no structural damage to their ships, only a complete technological humiliation. The fleet's paralysis could not be hidden. Multiple independent networks had logged the event. Some species demanded immediate withdrawal from any hostile action. Others insisted they must retaliate before the psychological impact spread. The chamber spiraled into accusation and fear as the realization settled. Humanity had engineered a capability that fundamentally challenged Council supremacy. Meanwhile, Terran leadership released a measured statement across public channels. They clarified that the shutdown was a defensive response to an unauthorized military incursion, and that any further aggression would be met with proportional force. They emphasized no desire for conquest, no intention to destabilize the galaxy, and no interest in imposing their authority. Their objective was singular: ensure no governing body dictated the destiny of humanity or any species seeking self-determination. Council allies began quietly withdrawing support, unwilling to risk their fleets. Several member species initiated back-channel communications with Terran diplomats, searching for alliances that might protect them should the Council collapse under its own miscalculations. Internal surveys revealed an alarming trend. Enormous sectors of the galaxy questioned the Council's ability to lead. Their credibility had been fractured by a single encounter. Humanity's message echoed through every network, calm, firm, and final. If the galaxy desired coexistence, humanity welcomed it. If the Council sought domination, humanity would ensure that era ended. The next move belonged to the Council, but every delegate understood the truth they could no longer hide. The balance of power had shifted, and humanity had redrawn the lines with unprecedented precision. The aftermath of the failed strike rippled through the galaxy faster than any formal decree. Species long accustomed to the Council's dominance witnessed the paralysis of its fleet and understood the implications instantly. A power capable of ending an armada without destruction possessed strength beyond any doctrine the Council had ever enforced. Rumors spread across trade routes, research enclaves, and frontier outposts as traders replayed intercepted transmissions showing Terran calm in the face of intimidation. The Council's illusion of unshakable authority began to fracture under the weight of its own overconfidence. Inside the Council chamber, panic replaced composure. Delegates who once postured as guardians of galactic order now whispered frantic calculations. Some insisted the Council could still salvage influence through diplomatic rehabilitation, while others urged immediate escalation before humanity's advantage widened further. A growing faction, however, argued that the attempt to subdue humans had been a catastrophic misjudgment, and that doubling down would only accelerate the Council's collapse. No one could deny that the chain of events had exposed vulnerabilities the Council had hidden behind layers of protocol and ceremony. While political discord mounted, humanity advanced with clarity. Terran diplomats initiated secure talks with independent species quietly seeking alternatives to Council authority. They offered no demands and set no conditions. Their message remained consistent: humanity sought coexistence, not dominion, and would not interfere in the internal affairs of other civilizations unless provoked. This approach earned rapid trust. Species disillusioned with Council arrogance viewed humans not as conquerors but as a stabilizing force willing to confront power without exploiting the aftermath. For many, this was the first sign that a new political order could emerge, one not dictated by fear. Terran Fleet Command reinforced border regions with disciplined precision, establishing a stance that discouraged opportunistic aggression without projecting hostility. Their ships maintained visible presence along vulnerable hyperlanes, not to intimidate, but to reassure colonies and partners that stability would hold. Every deployment was deliberate. Every formation signaled readiness rather than ambition. Humanity's restraint during the shutdown incident carried more weight than any show of force. The galaxy recognized that if humans had intended conquest, they could have taken advantage of the Council's paralysis. Instead, they stepped back, proving intention as clearly as capability. The Council attempted to reclaim authority by issuing a broadcast that framed the incident as a temporary setback and announced harsher security protocols. The message was ignored. Member species who had once obeyed without question now evaluated the Council's words with skepticism. Many began withholding resources, delaying compliance, or refusing to participate in joint operations. The Council's control fractured further when several mid-tier civilizations publicly declared neutrality in any dispute involving humanity. It became evident that the Council could no longer compel obedience through threat alone. Humanity released a final declaration addressed to the entire galactic community. The message stated that no tribute, no coercive decree, and no hierarchical mandate would ever determine the fate of humanity or any species seeking freedom. They advocated a new era built on voluntary cooperation, mutual respect, and transparent dialogue. They reminded the galaxy that strength did not justify dominance, and that sovereignty was not a privilege granted by political elites, but an inherent right of every civilization willing to defend it. The declaration resonated far beyond its intended audience. Civilizations that had quietly endured Council overreach now saw a path forward. Revolutionary movements emerged within member states demanding autonomy. Trade alliances shifted toward independent networks. Scientific collaborations began forming outside Council oversight. Humanity had not dismantled the Council through warfare, they had simply refused to kneel, and that refusal inspired others to re-evaluate the foundations of galactic governance. As the Council struggled to maintain relevance, Terran vessels traversed the stars with quiet authority. They carried no banners of conquest, only the confidence of a species that had faced down an empire and changed the trajectory of interstellar politics with a single word. The old order unraveled not through destruction, but through the undeniable demonstration that the Council's era of domination was over. Humanity stepped into the new age not as rulers, but as a force that proved dignity could challenge power and win. The galaxy watched them move across the horizon, recognizing that the future no longer belonged to those who demanded tribute, it belonged to those who stood their ground.